back again with another video. And today, the topic of this short talk, I think for comedic purpose, I'm just going to keep saying that, even though these talks end up not being short at all. For today's short talk, we are talking about the topic which you can already tell from the title. We are talking about science. I'm about to hit my workout for the day. As you can probably see in the background, it's already kind of late. So this is a bit of a late night short talk. I've gotten comfortable on the sofa here for this special occasion, and I'll actually try to keep it short. Okay, I'm going to stop. I mean, you can see how long this video is, so I guess you know whether or not it's short, but let's be honest, it's probably not. Let's actually get into the topic right away. What am I going to talk about? What do I want to talk about when it comes to science? You might have wondered as you read the title and decided to click on this video. Is this German caveman actually anti-science in some way, shape, or form? And maybe right off the bat, no, I'm not anti-science, but also yes, kinda. And you'll see what I mean by that as we go through this topic. I got the idea for this video, or I got the idea to talk about this, when I remembered something that has kind of stuck with me through the years, and that has really bothered me. And it is the kind of statement that really exemplifies my issue with science. So, if you want, the way in which I am, in fact, anti-science. I've tried to kind of pack that statement, or a sort of blueprint of that statement, because you can insert almost any topic and almost any subject into it, but the statement itself essentially stays the same. I've put it in the thumbnail, or of course, as I'm recording this, I have not put it into the thumbnail, but I intend to do so. So you already know what it is. There is no evidence to suggest that. And of course, the full statement would be there's no scientific evidence to suggest, etc. Insert whatever topic we're talking about. And now, of course, science is a big topic, and especially being anti-science, which is not really what it is, but being anti-purely science-based courses of action, that's kind of a big thing in the YouTube fitness scene right now. So there's a bit of a counter-movement, a counter-culture developing. That is a reaction to the late 2010s, early 2020s science-based lifting movement. I think I've already sort of mentioned this on the side in a previous video I did, actually several previous videos I did on lifting. But I've never really talked about this, mainly for the reason that I don't really care about it. To me, it was always very obvious how you should go about setting up your training, how you should go about, your own programming, kind of gathering intel, gathering information on lifting, and piecing together your workout programs, how you want to do certain exercises, etc. And that is a healthy mix of your own experience and information from other people's experience and science. So a mix of all three. And of course, when you're getting information from other people, ideally this should be people who actually know what they're talking about, so who actually have experience. And I think there's another layer here where people who are on steroids are generally to be mistrusted more because, of course, they still lift weights, but you can get very, very muscular even with relatively shitty training on steroids. Doesn't mean everyone does, just to be clear. But if you respond very well to steroids, you can train in ways that are very, or at least relatively ineffective for someone who might not be on steroids or who doesn't respond well to them, and still get very big. So when someone is on steroids, take what they say with a grain of salt. When someone is, or at least looks, very natural and gives training advice, they have a great physique, but it seems very natural and the timeline is kind of plausible, I would say that is generally to be treated as more valuable advice, just because their training has to have had some value. Even if some of the stuff only applies to them, they probably know what they are talking about, at least to an extent. And then, of course, if sufficient scientific evidence is available for something, that is also great. We have a lot more scientifically acquired information available when it comes to lifting than a lot of people did in the past, just because fitness has become very popular, lifting has become very mainstream, and lifting science has evolved a lot over the last 1 or 2 decades. So yeah, that's definitely information you should include. And this process I just described, to me, always seemed very obvious. You get some information from other people. Some of it is from here, some of it is from there. Try that shit, work out, make a plan. Also, don't just go off of evidence, also go off of what you actually want to do. What is fun? What are your goals, right? What should you be doing? Make a workout plan, try that shit for a couple of weeks, see how it goes, adjust it. This seems very obvious and very intuitive to me. But apparently it is not. Apparently there are some people out there who think that anything that is not almost entirely based on some scientific study when it comes to making a workout program is somehow bad or somehow certainly not good. Now, I don't just want to talk about lifting science in this video, but I think it is a good point to start at because it actually sort of exemplifies what I want to talk about when it comes to science in general. Science-based lifting, and I'm not the first to talk about this, a lot of people have gone into this, has gotten to a point where it's just a huge gimmick, where people will say, oh, you're doing curls this way? That's so stupid, or you're never going to make gains that way, or whatever. Do them this way. And then they show some tiny tweak. Their elbow is positioned in a slightly different way or something. And then somehow that is going to make your biceps explode where before you were making no gains at all, which is silly. First of all, based on the actual science that these statements are based on, there is not a huge impact when it comes to your gains. Second of all, a lot of the science is very, very flimsy. So if you have one study on something and it's been done on people who were not experienced lifters or even significant, they didn't even have any kind of significant training history. They're essentially like noobs who have I don't know, the amount of muscle mass they were born with. Obviously, that's a little bit of an overstatement, but you know what I'm saying. And that is the only evidence that this tip is based on. That one study that was done on a bunch of couch potatoes. Is this really making you this confident when talking about, doing that different curl variation? Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it shouldn't make you so confident as to, make these kinds of statements. Oh, you're bench pressing this way? Wrong. You should actually be doing whatever the fuck. Cable bench press. I'm not even a huge fan of the bench press, by the way. But I just the thought of doing a bench press with cables just came to mind, and that shit was funny, but actually not that unrealistic when you look at a lot of science-based stuff. And it kind of gets to the point, or it has gotten to the point in a lot of cases, and this doesn't go for every channel that calls itself science-based. This is a weird angle for filming, actually. I'm sitting a little slouched here. Let's try it like this. So, this doesn't go for every channel that refers to itself as science-based or that people would consider science-based, but it goes for the sort of scene in general. It has just gotten very, very gimmicky and very focused on these fads, on these trends of, a big thing was the lengthened partial. So the lengthened part, the lengthened half, or even less than half of a movement being way more important for hypertrophy, which led people to saying that you should only do lengthened partials because that way, you're going to invest less effort to grow more muscle mass. And by the way, I've already talked about focusing purely on aesthetics and purely on, growing as much muscle as possible without any effort, if that's possible. I've already mentioned this in a previous video, which is going to be linked somewhere up here, in my opinion. That is very fucking goofy. And I will soon make a follow-up to that video because I do think bodybuilding has its value, has its place in physical development, but focusing purely on the way you look, in my opinion, is not it. Certainly not if you're a fucking man. I've kind of trailed off here. What was I actually saying? You can tell it's late. Where the fuck were we? Oh yeah, lengthened partials. So, by the way, funny story, I'm getting into lengthened partials in just a sec, but I probably edited this out right now. I legit just sat here for like a minute straight and tried to remember what the fuck I was talking about. Week has been very, very stressful. I've been working out like 2 or 3 times every day because I've been injured, or I was injured week before. I had to skip a couple of workouts, so I've really been going hard, and I've also had a lot of work, so my mind is kind of messed up, and I just sat here like a complete fucking NPC, like my soul just logged out of my body and tried to remember what the fuck I was talking about. Anyways, getting back to lengthened partials. So everyone was saying, just do lengthened partials. Just essentially skip the fucking exercise, skip full range of motion. Lengthened partials are not a bonus anymore. Just do lengthened partials. Everyone might be an overstatement, but a lot of people were saying this and were hyping up lengthened partials a lot. And then Jeff Nippard, who, I'm going to say this, Jeff Nippard, he's not always right or wrong about anything, but he's a great guy, very likable, very chill. And he went ahead and funded, I believe, a study on this. And the study showed that there was no statistically significant difference between lengthened partials or doing full range of motion on exercises. It was a direct comparison, and there was no difference. Actually, there was a difference. It wasn't statistically significant, but I'm just still going to go ahead and point it out. Lengthened partials, so doing just lengthened partials, was actually worse. And, it wasn't statistically significant, so there might be other factors that caused this that were the reason why it performed slightly worse. But I just want to put that out there, right? Potentially, they were actually worse. And it was just such a slight difference that it's difficult to kind of draw any conclusions from that. Doesn't change the fact, though. If you look at the stats, they were worse. And suddenly, everyone shut the fuck up about lengthened partials. At least from what I can tell, from what I've seen. And isn't that fucking funny? Because lots of people were saying before, this shit is overhyped. Just work out hard. And lengthened partials are not the only example, but I think it was a very, very good example because it was fucking hilarious when Jeff Nippard did that study, and that was the result. And I watched that shit, and I was like, what have these guys been talking about all this time? Like, I mean, what is this? And this, I think, is the problem most people have with the science-based community, is not that they are wrong about stuff. It's not that they think this and then there's an update, there's new evidence, there's new studies, and then they change their mind and they say, hey, look, we thought this, but there's a lot of evidence that now suggests that it's something else. So we were wrong. That's cool. That is actually what science is, by the way. That's the point of science. The problem is the confidence and absolute fervor to the point of actually being very condescending and assuming this sort of position of authority with which they present this shit. Instead of saying, we have these studies suggesting this, I don't know, but the science seems to indicate, and I'm actually going to get into the science in a minute, that phrase itself, but this study seems to indicate this, so maybe try it out, maybe not. It's not well established. Instead, these guys will cite like 2 studies on something and be like, this is the shit. This is what's up. And the funniest thing is, I'm not even going to go into that too much, but obviously people just completely misinterpreting studies to the point where in many cases you can go and check out the actual study and they are literally saying the opposite of what the study that they themselves linked indicates. Natural Hypertrophy talked about this in a video he made on science-based lifting. But yeah, the issue at the end of the day is not being wrong about stuff. The issue is the fact that these guys pretend like the science that they are basing their shit on is somehow infinitely more valuable or should be an infinitely more important, more respected authority on lifting advice than experience, for instance. And that is just bullshit. And this is where we get into science in general. Because I've heard this topic being talked about a lot in the lifting community, but at least me personally, I've not seen anyone really talk about the way science is treated in general in our society. And here's where we get into why I am anti-science, or the way in which I am anti-science. Science has essentially become a new age religion. The average person will use statements like, science says that, followed by some statement which is now assumed to be fact. Like, unequivocal fact. This is just true. Science says that this food is actually good for you, or is actually not good for you. And now it's just a fact. And there's not even a thought process going on as to why that might be. One of my favorite phrases is, it's scientifically proven. And the same exact phrase actually exists in German. Es ist wissenschaftlich bewiesen. Oder erwiesen. That shit is fucking hilarious. You want to know why? Because the inherent nature of science is that nothing can be proven. At least not in the sense people who say this shit think. You can prove, quote unquote, a hypothesis in the sense that you can reliably replicate results on some type of experiment, hundreds, thousands of times. That doesn't mean that there might not be something going on that you're missing. Okay, but in that sense, sure, like, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Sure, right? However, okay, just to get into that example here, you can create circumstances under which water doesn't boil at 100 degrees Celsius. If you change the pressure, the atmospheric pressure, boiling point is going to be different. If you put something in the water, depending on what it is, boiling point might be different. And this is where we get into the issue here, because boiling water is something where, generally speaking, most of the variables are not going to change a lot, okay? So under normal circumstances, yes, water is going to boil at more or less 100 degrees Celsius, because the variables that might influence that are not going to be drastically different. Not so for a lot of other things, really. A lot of things that maybe are strongly influenced by countless different variables. And in many cases, actually in most cases, things are not as well established as the boiling point of water. The fact that something is scientifically proven doesn't mean jack shit. It could be disproven a fucking week from now, because people missed something. Maybe someone made a fucking mistake on an experiment. But the way this usually goes is that the more educated people are on a topic, the more aware they are of this. So if you're a scientist and you're working in a specific field, if you read something, if you read a paper by someone else in that field, you're going to be very aware of how much weight that paper has. But then you got scientific or sort of semi-scientific magazines, for instance, that write articles about a paper like that. And now, not only do you not have all the information available that was involved in making the paper, you've also got someone who's trying to present this as a scoop, right? As some big new discovery. So he says, science discovers that, or blah, blah, blah. Boston researchers discover that. Which, of course, sounds like they've discovered something that is a thing, right? It's right there. That might not be the case. Maybe they tested a hypothesis and they made some interesting observations. They had some interesting results that are indicating something and are very promising, and these guys are very happy about it. But they are fully aware that this is not a 100% thing, because really, when it comes to actual science, nothing is 100% established. Nothing is a 100% safe thing. But if you pick up that magazine and you read the article, it does sound like it. It sounds very, it sounds very established, very real. Now you got some fucking tabloid, the type of magazine that is on the fucking couch table in the waiting room when you go to the dentist or some shit. The type of magazine where any sort of moderately intelligent person is actually genuinely curious about the types of people who buy this shit. And they just present this as a straight up fact. And then you got people reading this shit and saying things like, science says that. Science has proven that. I want to go ahead and take a moment to actually talk about this term itself. Science. The science. And what that term means. Now, of course, I know what science actually is. In fact, I think a lot of somewhat educated people technically know what science is. But how is this term used? And how do people feel about this term? What do they actually mean when they say the science? Science has proven that. Science says. They are using this term as if science is some kind of authority. Like a god. Science says that. That's like saying fucking Jesus says that. That's like science is actually an individual saying things, which is not the case. And of course, you might sit there and think it's silly that I'm pointing this out, but sit back for a moment and think about how people use this turn of phrase, how people actually use this term, science. They use it as if it is this sort of numinous, like magical thing. Science is literally a method. It's a way of doing something, of acquiring knowledge. And it's a very cool method. It's a very good method. It's a well thought out concept. But science is one of the tools of acquiring knowledge. Okay? It's a specific way of utilizing empirical data to try to get close to a sort of truth when it comes to a certain type of topic. But it is not the only way to approach truth. It is certainly not the only thing you can base decisions on. And in fact, it shouldn't be the only thing you base decisions on. And yet people treat science, this sort of numinous, whatever the fuck that means, which includes any and all scientists, anyone who has a degree in anything, they treat it essentially as a New Age church. And of course, science is different from Christianity, for instance. But the way this authority is applied to it is actually very similar. And this leads to things like people just inherently trusting an individual that's a scientist, even when they're talking about topics that are not actually connected to their field of expertise. You look at people like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson, by actual sharp people, is considered an absolute buffoon. He's a dumbass. He's a goofy dude. But regular people, average people, people who have perhaps even a below average level of intelligence, they think he knows what the fuck he's talking about. Even when he's talking about fucking transgender athletes or whatever new random topic he thinks he's an expert on. The guy is an astrophysicist, as far as I know, and I'm not even really sure if he's a good astrophysicist or if he's mainly like a public figure. Regardless, he will get into fucking tangents about philosophical stuff. How much philosophy has that guy read? He's a complete fucking idiot. And yet people will give credence to what he says because he's a scientist in some capacity. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a scientist, sure. You know who's also a scientist? Fucking Lex Fridman. You think the fields these two guys work in are remotely similar? You think Neil deGrasse Tyson could walk into fucking Lex Fridman's office and start working on some shit tomorrow? No, he wouldn't know what the fuck he's looking at. They're maybe both good at math, but that's about it. That's about as similar as their fields get. If they are both scientists, and to the average person, that means they know what the fuck they're talking about. That is the way in which I am anti-science. I have a huge issue with this weird sort of aggrandizement of science as a fucking divine authority. The science is not a thing, okay? Science is a way of evaluating evidence and acquiring empirical information. That's it. And the people using science, they are scientists, yes, in their respective fields, and generally speaking, they will know what they are talking about to a greater extent when it comes to the specific thing they are working on than someone who's not working on that. But that goes for fucking everyone. A plumber knows more about plumbing than you do, unless you watching this are a fucking plumber. Yet somehow a plumber is considered a complete fucking idiot, while a scientist is apparently the authority on fucking anything. And funnily enough, the shit a plumber knows is probably a lot more well established than the shit a scientist knows. When a physicist says, this is how this works, that's probably a lot more up for grabs than when a plumber explains to you how something fucking works. The flip side of this glorification of science is that any way of acquiring knowledge or wisdom, any sort of understanding of something that is not scientific is inherently considered fucking bullshit by most people. And that might actually be the worst part of this whole thing. You know what exclusively relying on scientific evidence completely excludes rational thinking, actual, literal intelligence, logical deduction. Logical deduction is not science. It's piecing together parts of a puzzle. It's excluding possibilities. It's, making judgment calls. Intuition as well. Complete bullshit, because it's not scientific. Anyone who has actually done things in life knows that that is fucking stupid. Funnily enough, people think scientists are smart. People think scientists are intelligent. Now, as someone who has spoken to, has interacted with a lot of people in the academic field, and as someone with a very high IQ, I can confidently tell you that a lot of scientists are not very intelligent. But yeah, it's very fucking ironic that people think scientists are intelligent, and by extension, they are acting intelligently, or they are being smart about things when they rely on the science or trust in the science, when really only acting based on what the science says, whatever the fuck that means, is actually the opposite of being intelligent. It means you're literally switching off your brain and just doing what someone is telling you. And then the funny thing as well is that, how do you think science actually works? Science requires people to come up with stuff that is not proven so that they can then test it and see if it's real. So science actually requires intelligence and intuition, because how the fuck are people going to come up with hypotheses to test if they only rely on what is established? How are they going to create a hypothesis? What is the hypothesis going to be? Because any hypothesis they create is fucking made up. It's not proven. How could it be? It's a hypothesis. They literally made it up to prove it. I'm getting kind of heated here, but yeah, as someone who is involved in the world of academics and also happens to be a very intelligent person, this shit is fucking hilarious to me and very bizarre, really. And scientists, and I've noticed this, especially scientists who I would judge to not be super intelligent, maybe they're above average in terms of intelligence, but not super like crazy brainiacs by any measure. They seem to really revel in this sort of authority that has been given to science as a sort of general part of society. They seem to really like that. And I mean, of course they do, because they are not particularly special individuals in any capacity. They are maybe slightly intelligent, good at memorizing stuff, but that's about it. Many of them not very attractive, not in good shape, not juicy, big, buff guys, either fat schlobs or weird, like pretzel stick looking motherfuckers. And they enjoy lording this power, this authority over regular folks, even though they know because they are actually, they work in science, they know perfectly well that this is fucking bullshit. But they either don't care because it's great for them, or what I have perceived is that some of these people actually seem to have sort of gaslighted themselves into believing they are something special, and they are sort of above the general populace, and it's better if those stupid folk who are not actually that much more stupid than they themselves are, but regardless, those plebs It's better for them to just believe what the scientist says and let the scientist figure out the nitty-gritty details than people actually thinking for themselves. This shit is fucking crazy, really. The complete disregard for anything that was not discovered in a scientific way, that has not been established by a study or something of the sort, is actually what gave me the idea for this video. That's what I alluded to earlier. The statement that I put in the thumbnail, there is no evidence to suggest that, and of course we're talking about scientific evidence here, is a statement that is used to essentially disregard the idea someone might have or the conception someone might have of a certain topic. The problem is that there are topics that are, for many different kinds of reasons, not focused on by any scientific field. So there has never been any study of any kind looking into these topics, and there won't be any for the foreseeable future, because maybe it's not as relevant as other things. Maybe it's not something that garners a lot of money, because of course, if you're trying to figure something out scientifically, if you're trying to conduct a study or run experiments in a lab or whatever, you need some kind of funding. So if no one is interested in funding studies on a certain topic, there simply won't be any scientific evidence to suggest anything, really, when it comes to the given topic. To illustrate a little bit what the fuck I'm talking about here, because all of this is very, here and there, very wishy-washy, let me give you a specific example. And this is actually a little bit of a funny story, because I'm going to go back to my 15, 16-year-old self here, back to the good old fucking Coomer days. Now, 15, 16-year-old me, I was watching a stream or something, or a stream highlight of a German YouTuber. And he watched a video with facts about the male sexual organ, the penis, like random fun facts. And one of the fun facts mentioned by the person who made the video, who in fact was a woman, by the way, was that, contrary to popular opinion or something, obviously it was a very long time ago, I don't precisely remember how it was put, and also obviously the video was in German, but essentially what she said was, contrary to popular opinion, jerking off with one hand, so always using the same hand, does not cause your dick to curve to one side. Now, I never thought about this topic at all until I saw this video. But I saw this video and I was like, how does she know that? How would she know that? And in fact, the guy who was reacting to the video asked the same exact thing. He was like, what is she talking about? How could she possibly know that? And as random, bizarre things sometimes tend to do, this really stuck with me. Maybe because it's such a specific thing, maybe because it's such a random thing, but every now and then I would think about it for a couple of seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and then it would sort of vanish again. And at some point, this was probably already 1.5 years later, so significantly later point in time, this thought has been popping up in my mind every now and then. I went onto the internet and I Googled that shit. I tried to find fucking evidence on whether or not always jerking off with the same hand makes your dick curve to one side. And obviously, I didn't find any fucking evidence. Like, I mean, people make studies on weird shit. Maybe it would have been possible that something like this existed, but I think it was to be expected that there was nothing on this. I did find articles about it, though. And what the articles said was, no, it does not make your dick curve to one side. And they always stated the same evidence, or they stated the same reasoning behind this confident no. And every single time it was, there is no scientific evidence to suggest that jerking off with the same hand for extended periods of time makes your dick curve to one side. And this really bothered me. Right now, you're probably watching the video thinking, what the fuck is this dude spending his time on? I was a fucking teenager. I was spending essentially all of my free time researching random shit, and this was amongst the random shit I researched. But yeah, those 2 or 3 articles I clicked on, those were essentially the end of this story for the time being. And then recently, like a couple of months ago, I watched a video by Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization. And the guy has kind of come under fire lately for essentially what I talked about in this video, for acting all high and mighty while in some cases giving pretty shit advice. But I generally, if there was a video on a topic that I was interested in, I would look at it. I would see what he talked about. If he presented some evidence that was interesting, I would still watch it. But that video kind of was a little bit of a nail in the coffin for me, or the final nail in the coffin. There's a lot of nails in a coffin, but the final nail in the coffin for me was this fucking video that I watched recently, where he said, and I don't even think it was the point of the video, I think he just mentioned it sort of on the side, that jerking off and watching porn is not bad for you. Because, here it comes, there is no scientific evidence to suggest that it is. And I heard that. And as someone who, in a, sort of broad sense, is part of the self-improvement sort of sphere, and knows about many of the struggles of modern day young men, because I'm a fairly young guy who has grown up in this society, I am, of course, aware of the fact that you can go online, search up this topic, and find thousands of testimonies from people who talked about how they quit watching porn and it fucking changed a lot of things in their life. How they struggled with anxiety and depression and social awkwardness, erectile dysfunction. And this is not just young guys, by the way. This is people from all kinds of different ages. Older guys as well, especially if we're talking about erectile dysfunction and shit. And this moment in this video really made me lose any and all respect I had for the guy. Because I realized this dude is like a cult member. This dude will ignore non-scientific evidence, literally screaming him in the face. He will just straight up ignore it because no one did a study on the topic. That is crazy. You have people who are actually like psychologists, who are scientists, right? Saying this shit is bad for you. Talking about how it's bad for you. which, by the way, you don't need to be a psychologist for. A lot of people understand how this whole porn thing can have very, very negative effects. And this dude is sitting there saying there's no scientific evidence to suggest any sort of negative effect. How is that relevant? How is that fucking relevant? That's like saying there's no scientific evidence to suggest that women get pregnant from sex because no one has ever done a study on it. Like, what are we talking about here? Anyways, I'm getting kind of riled up. I took a break in between a little one to actually have a bite because I was losing some energy, getting a little unfocused, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. That was really the sort of the final thing that caused me to say I need to make a video about this at some point. I need to talk about this, and I had this video idea kind of stored up for a long time. I initially planned on making this a more scripted video. Now it's just one of my rambly rants. I guess it is what it is. If you guys enjoyed yourselves, if you found this interesting, learned something, you found it entertaining to see me get all heated, all riled up about the topic of pretentious academics and stupid people acting like religious sheep, go ahead and leave a like. Let's not make this outro longer than it needs to be. I feel like on every single video, I try to find even more bizarre ways to make this outro longer and longer. If you want to give me a suggestion for a future video, if you have any questions about this video, if there's something you want to discuss, if you want to shit on me for shitting on beloved science, Mother Science, go ahead and leave a comment. You can also go ahead and follow me on Instagram or just check it out. Write me a DM there. Tell me that I'm a poo-poo head for shitting on the science. And yeah, if you want to join me on my journey of recording these overly long, completely unstructured rambles, go ahead and subscribe. I make videos on fitness, on general health, and also on philosophy. Really, I make videos on anything I feel like making, but those are my sort of main focus points for this channel, if you will. So if you're interested in that, if you like me, perhaps, or just find me mildly entertaining, go ahead and subscribe and activate the notification bell if you want notifications. All that being said, I will see you guys in the next one, and until then, have a good one.